You don't have an appointment. Please step away from the transaction area, the security guard said, voice firm, eyes averted. The woman stopped, still holding her folder, nodded slightly, then stepped back. Inside, the receptionist frowned, glanced through the glass wall, and whispered something that made the entire counter chuckle. No one asked what she came for. No one cared to know her name. All they saw was a black woman, plainly dressed, and in that moment they made a decision that spoke for the entire bank. A decision rooted not in facts, but in assumptions. And yet, just a few minutes later, every person in that room would be frozen in place, because the truth doesn't always walk in wearing a suit. Cassandra Lewis walked up the stone steps of the Central Bank of Houston, holding a folder close to her chest. Inside were documents she had spent weeks preparing, account statements, transfer authorizations, and signed legal forms. She had an appointment, one that had taken months of coordination. She wasn't nervous, only focused. Until she reached the door. Her appearance was modest. A navy blue cardigan, faded jeans, and flat shoes, no makeup, no designer purse, no jewelry. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back simply. The kind of look most would overlook, except here, it drew attention for all the wrong reasons. The security guard standing near the revolving doors didn't wait for her to speak. The moment she approached, he stepped in front of her path. "Ma'am, this is a private banking facility," he said, his voice practiced. Cold. Clients with appointments only. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask if she had an appointment. He simply saw her and assumed she didn't belong. Cassandra reached into her purse without saying a word. She took out a printed confirmation slip, the bank's logo clearly visible at the top. With steady hands, she held it out for him to see. The guard glanced at it, didn't read it, didn't touch it. "You'll need to wait outside," he said, waving her off like she was offering a flyer. She stayed still for a moment, eyes meeting his, then slowly stepped back. The paper crumpled slightly in her hand. She turned to the side, giving space to others entering the building. None of them looked her in the eye. People in the lobby had begun to notice. A woman in heels paused, took a quick glance at Cassandra. Shaber then walked faster. A man in a navy suit on a phone call gave her a long look, then kept walking without a word. No one asked if she needed help. No one questioned the guard. Their silence made their thoughts louder. Behind the glass partition, the receptionist spotted what was happening. She leaned toward her coworker, whispered something with a smirk, and both of them chuckled quietly. Then she looked toward the guard, made a subtle gesture, a shake of the head paired with a dismissive wave. The message was clear. Don't let her in. Cassandra saw it all. Every glance, every shrug, every smile that wasn't meant to be kind. But she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She held her folder tighter, stepped to the side of the entrance and waited. Her posture calm, her silence deliberate. A young teller near the back looked up and muttered under his breath, "She's probably just looking for air conditioning." Another teller laughed, not too loudly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Nobody stopped them. The atmosphere in the bank changed, but not in any official way. There was no announcement, no security alarm, just a quiet shift in mood, a collective agreement that she didn't belong, and a refusal to challenge that thought. The marble floor beneath Cassandra's feet was spotless. The air conditioning hummed above her. The sunlight streamed through the chrome, outlining her shadow on the tiles. And still, no one asked her why she was there. In that moment, the most powerful thing in the room wasn't a policy or a manager or a locked vault. It was the silence. The kind that says, "We've already decided what kind of person you are, and nothing you do will change that." But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Cassandra wasn't there to ask for help. She wasn't there to plead for service. She had come for something far greater, and the truth was already walking right behind her. She didn't flinch. Cassandra stood still, just as calm as she had been moments earlier, watching everyone in the bank without a word. She wasn't angry, not visibly. Her silence was sharper than any protest could be, and it echoed louder than any voice raised in defense. A middle-aged couple waiting near the service counter caught sight of the exchange. The woman opened her mouth slightly, then closed it just as fast. Her husband gave a sideways glance, And when the receptionist looked their way, they both turned away, suddenly focused on their phones. It was easier to pretend not to see. A young employee passed by with a stack of papers. He noticed Cassandra, noticed the guard still standing stiffly by the entrance. He slowed down, hesitated as if he might say something. But then his eyes caught the gaze of a department head standing behind the glass. That was enough. He straightened up and walked faster, saying nothing. The receptionist pushed her chair back and stepped out from behind the counter. Her heels clicked against the tile. She crossed her arms the way people do when they want to show who's in charge. "Are you here to file a complaint or something?" she asked, voice flat, eyes narrowed. Cassandra's voice remained steady. "I have an appointment, 11:15. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, let out a small huff that was half laugh, half disbelief. "Then please wait outside," she said, her tone syrupy and sharp at once. "We're trying to keep the space clear for our real clients. Thank you." She turned without waiting for a response and walked away. No one in the lobby said a word. The few customers who had been watching quietly went back to their business. One woman shifted uncomfortably in her chair, looked at Cassandra, then looked away. A man at the ATM stared down at the screen, fingers hovering over the keypad, not moving. Not a single voice rose in protest. Not one customer, not one colleague, not even a stranger spoke up. They all saw what was happening. They all knew it wasn't right. But they chose quiet, chose not to get involved, chose safety over conscience. Cassandra didn't push back. She didn't demand respect. She didn't ask why she was being treated differently. She simply nodded once gently, then stepped away from the glass doors and walked toward the far wall of the lobby. There, next to the floor-to-ceiling window, she stopped. The glass reflected the room behind her, and through it she could see the faces that had just turned away. The marble was cool beneath her shoes. Outside, cars passed. Inside, time seemed to slow. She stood still, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. The folder in her hand didn't shake. She didn't sigh or fidget. She just waited. And in doing so, she forced the entire room to sit with the discomfort they had helped create. The silence didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt heavy, complicit. Every polite smile, every averted gaze, every pair of eyes that refused to meet hers, they became a wall taller than any policy could build. And behind that wall, dignity was being tested. But Cassandra didn't shrink. She didn't step back. She simply stood beside that wall of glass, where the light touched her shoulders, where no one could pretend they hadn't seen. The quiet in the lobby didn't last. In the far corner, a group of bank employees stood chatting, pretending to be focused on their coffee and screens. But their glances gave them away. Every few seconds, one of them would glance back at Cassandra, smirk, whisper something, then chuckle. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried, thin, sharp, and unmistakably mocking. One of them leaned in and said just loud enough for the others to hear, "She probably thinks this is a soup kitchen." The group burst into a restrained laugh, careful not to make eye contact with anyone outside their circle. Across the lobby, a customer sitting in one of the waiting chairs spoke under her breath to the man beside her. No dress code, no presence, definitely not an investor. Her words dripped with certainty, as if someone like Cassandra could never belong here, no matter what she was holding or who she claimed to be. Cassandra remained where she was, quiet, unmoved. She made no attempt to defend herself, no effort to correct them. Her eyes drifted past the people, past the polished marble floor, past the tall lobby ceilings, and out through the window to the city beyond. Cars flowed down the street. People hurried past. Life moved on, detached from the cruelty echoing behind the glass. Another security guard arrived, leaning slightly toward the one who had first stopped Cassandra. "Why is she still here?" he asked, voice low but not low enough. "Did you tell her to leave yet?" His tone was impatient, edged with annoyance, as if her presence was a violation. Before the first guard could answer, the door moved. The revolving glass door at the front of the bank spun slowly, and a man stepped through. Tall, clean-cut, in a charcoal suit. He moved with purpose, ignoring the receptionist, ignoring the security, ignoring the people now whispering behind cupped hands. His eyes searched the room for only one person, and found her, Cassandra. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward her. No pause, no glances to the side. When he reached her, he lowered his head slightly in respect, then extended his hand in a clear, formal gesture. "Mrs. Lewis," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "apologies for the delay. I'm here to escort you inside." The shift in energy was immediate. Every conversation paused. The group of employees at the coffee counter turned completely silent. One even dropped his paper cup without noticing. The receptionist's smile vanished, replaced by a confused, frozen stare. Cassandra gave a small nod, said nothing, and stepped forward. The man in the suit guided her gently toward the inner corridor of the bank. His demeanor wasn't rushed or forced. It was respectful, measured, as if her presence was not just expected, but important. No one in the room could explain what they had just seen. They didn't know who the man was. They didn't understand what Cassandra's real role could be, but something had changed. The woman they had dismissed seconds earlier was now the center of attention, and not because of her cardigan or her silence, but because someone had just treated her with deference. In that single moment, the story they had written in their minds about who she was, where she came from, what she was worth, began to crumble. And yet, Cassandra still hadn't said a word to any of them. What had begun as whispers and confusion quickly shifted into stunned silence. The man in the charcoal suit turned toward the room, then spoke calmly with the weight of authority. "I'm William Harris," he said, "representative of Landver Group. We handle large-scale commercial real estate transactions." His voice was clear, composed. No one interrupted him. He turned to Cassandra, opened the leather folder in his hand, and handed her a set of documents with a deliberate, practiced gesture. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lewis. The transfer is now complete." Cassandra accepted the folder without a word. Her fingers did not tremble. Her expression didn't change. But the silence in the lobby grew deeper, as if the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Harris continued, addressing the stunned audience that had been so sure just moments ago. "Effective today, Mrs. Cassandra Lewis is the sole owner of this building, including all current leases and operations within the Houston Central Bank branch." The words hit like a wave. You could almost hear the shift in posture, the sound of minds racing to rewrite their assumptions. At the reception desk, the woman who had spoken so confidently now stood frozen. Her hand still held the office phone. The receiver never quite made it back to the hook. Her mouth was slightly open, as if trying to catch up with reality. The security guard who had blocked Cassandra at the door shifted his feet, inching slowly backward. He didn't say anything. His eyes stayed low, glued to the floor. His earlier confidence dissolved into something smaller. He didn't need anyone to spell it out. He knew. At the front desk, no one laughed anymore. The employees behind the glass windows, once so busy with side comments and second glances, had gone still. One woman lowered her eyes. A man at the far corner reached for a pen that wasn't there. They suddenly had nothing to say. All of them watched Cassandra now, but not with judgment, with uncertainty, with the uncomfortable realization that they had just made a mistake in full view of their peers. Cassandra didn't look at any of them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand apologies. She simply turned to Harris, gave him a small nod, then stepped forward. Her voice was soft but carried weight. "I'd like to meet with the branch manager," she said. "Give me 10 minutes." There was no threat in her tone, no tension, just certainty. Harris nodded. "He's waiting for you on the 12th floor," he replied. And with that, Cassandra began walking toward the private elevator at the back of the lobby. Each step was measured, quiet. She didn't need to explain who she was. She had never needed to. Her actions had already done that for her. No one dared stop her now. No one tried to reclaim the dignity they had given up so easily earlier. She passed the same people who had watched her with disdain, walked by the security guards who had doubted her worth, and moved past the receptionist who had asked her to wait outside. None of them met her gaze, not because she was trying to shame them, but because the truth had already spoken louder than any accusation ever could. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful part. Cassandra didn't rise in anger. She rose in grace, and in doing so, she left the room breathless. What happened in the lobby didn't stay in the lobby. Within 30 minutes, the story began moving through the bank's internal network. The headline on the staff message board was blunt: "Woman denied at entrance is new owner of the building." Some employees stared at their screens in disbelief. Others closed their laptops and quietly left for early lunch breaks, hoping to avoid questions they couldn't answer. The branch manager came down from the 12th floor, breathless and visibly unsettled. His eyes darted around the lobby, trying to assess how much damage had already been done. When he finally reached Cassandra, his hand extended quickly, almost desperately. "Mrs. Lewis, welcome," he said. The handshake was firm, but the uncertainty behind his smile couldn't be hidden. Cassandra didn't seem angry. She shook his hand, nodded politely, and made a simple request. "I'd prefer a private meeting. No need for a public display." Her voice was calm, even. There was no sarcasm, no edge, just clarity. The manager nodded without hesitation. He looked relieved, almost grateful. But the damage had already outgrown the walls of the bank. That same afternoon, someone anonymously uploaded a short audio clip. It was recorded near the reception desk, just minutes before Cassandra had been escorted inside. The voice was unmistakably the receptionist's, condescending, mocking, dismissive. The clip spread fast. Within hours, it appeared on Twitter, then LinkedIn, then Reddit. The caption read, "This is how they treated a woman who owned the building." Major news outlets picked it up by nightfall. Local papers ran headlines like, "Bank humiliates investor before learning she owns the property." On TV, a news anchor summarized the incident. An example of judgment gone wrong, and a reminder of how bias, when unchecked, can cost more than just reputations. Online, thousands of comments poured in. People expressed outrage, frustration, and shame. Some admitted they had done the same, judged someone based on clothes, posture, or skin tone. Others shared stories of moments when they too had been overlooked or dismissed. The conversation grew beyond the bank. It became a mirror held up to society. Under pressure, the bank's board of directors issued a formal apology. In the statement, they acknowledged the failure in employee behavior, the silence of bystanders, and the consequences of assuming someone's worth based on appearance. They promised to revise their diversity training programs and implement stricter internal oversight. The CEO made a rare appearance in a video message. "We didn't just fail one woman, we failed the values we claim to stand for." The public wanted a response from Cassandra. Reporters called, emails were sent. Interview requests flooded her lawyer's office, but she declined them all. Instead, she wrote a single sentence and asked for it to be published as her official statement. It read, "I believe in kindness that lasts longer than public apologies." That line struck a chord. People printed it on posters, shared it in Instagram stories, quoted it in think pieces. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, but it said everything that needed to be said. Cassandra didn't ask for justice. She didn't call for anyone to be fired. She didn't seek revenge. She simply let the world see what had unfolded and then chose to walk forward without bitterness. What lingered wasn't her silence. It was her dignity. And that, more than anything, was what no one could ignore. The story didn't stop with headlines or hashtags. It spread, slowly at first, then all at once. Financial forums began sharing the clip. Startup groups, especially those focused on women entrepreneurs, reposted the article with captions like, "Let this remind you, stay grounded, stay sharp." In Black professional circles, Cassandra Lewis's name became a symbol, not of revenge, but of quiet resilience. On a student blog in Detroit, a high school girl wrote a personal piece. "I've always felt like people look at me and expect me to shrink. But because of her, I'm learning to dream beyond the seat others think I should settle for." Her words, raw and real, were shared thousands of times. A Black CEO of a logistics firm reposted the story with a simple caption, "Cassandra is living proof that intellect doesn't need an entrance announcement." Others echoed the sentiment. In meetings, people quoted her one-line statement. In classrooms, professors used the incident to start conversations about implicit bias. Cassandra became more than a name. She became a reference point. Soon after the hashtag "I Walk Like Cassandra" began trending, it wasn't just a slogan, it was a reminder to move with dignity even when surrounded by doubt, to hold your head high in spaces that try to lower it, to answer prejudice not with shouting but with presence. Stories began appearing beneath the tag, stories of quiet strength, of being overlooked, of being judged, and still choosing to rise. The bank, now facing scrutiny and public pressure, reached out to Cassandra again. This time, not with a defense, but with a proposal. They invited her to serve as an honorary advisor on inclusive customer service policies. It was a gesture to rebuild trust, to learn from what had happened. Cassandra declined. She didn't want a title. She didn't need one. Instead, she made a single request, that the bank create and maintain a public reading corner in the building's main lobby, open to all, stocked with books by authors of every background. Not everyone who walks in needs a loan, she wrote, but sometimes they need a place to feel seen. The space opened 2 weeks later. There was no press event, no ribbon cutting, just a small sign above the bookshelf. Take a moment, take a page. To Cassandra, this wasn't a victory to be celebrated. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about making sure the next person who walked into that building, no matter how they looked, what they wore, or where they came from, wouldn't have to stand alone. Her story reminded a city that silence in the face of injustice is a choice, and like all choices, it has consequences. The receptionist who laughed had been reassigned. The security guard received mandatory training. But more than that, an entire community had been forced to reflect. The ripple effect was deeper than embarrassment. It created conversations around boardroom tables, in church groups, in teacher lounges. People began asking hard questions. Who do we overlook? Who do we judge too quickly? What part do we play when we say nothing? Cassandra never asked to be the center of it. She didn't want the spotlight. But once the world turned its eyes on her, she made sure they saw something worth remembering. Not power, not anger, but grace. Some moments seem small, a gesture, a glance, a decision at the door. But behind them, a deeper truth often hides. Sometimes a single act reveals the weight of an entire system. And sometimes a single person, standing in silence, can force that system to see itself. Cassandra Lewis never raised her voice. She didn't seek justice through outrage or public confrontation. She didn't demand attention. She simply let the truth unfold. And when it did, it echoed farther than any shout could reach. This story isn't just about a building. It isn't just about a sale. It's about dignity. It's about what happens when a Black woman chooses stillness over spectacle, and how that choice becomes a mirror for everyone watching. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, where you come from, or what others assumed about you, this story is for you, and your voice matters. We invite you to share your experience in the comments. If you believe kindness is stronger than assumptions, if you believe presence speaks louder than prejudice, like this video. And if you believe the world needs more stories that restore faith in dignity and truth, subscribe to Black Excellence. This is where small stories carry big power. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We hope Cassandra's quiet courage reminded you of something deep within yourself. And we'll see you in the next video, where justice isn't rare, where respect isn't earned by appearance, and where truth always has the final word.